let's get into the last part of today's show. And I am going to talk about the five position groups on offense, and I'm going to rank them. And we're going to do this kind of three ways. Or three times. We're going to do it right now. And this is about where they are right now. This is not a projection to the fall. This is not I think it's going to be this. It's based on where they are right now. And that is going to be a combination of a couple things. What we know about it, the group now, what they've proven, the depth of the group, and the talent plus, which is, talent plus potential of the group. Those three things factor into it. So I'm going to go through my five. I'm going to go number one, number two, number three, number four, number five. Actually, you know what? I'm going to go backwards. Actually, I'm going to go five, four, three, two, one. And then I'm going to give you guys my ranking, tell you why I have it there. We'll have some fun with it, though. I want you guys to share with me your rankings as well. So we're going to go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 for the Notre Dame offense. And this is for the spring only, going into the spring of where things stand right now. We're going to be in number 5 at tight end. When you look at the tight end group, there's some talent there, no doubt, but there's a name that's missing from this group, and that is Mitchell Evans, because this spring there will be no Mitchell Evans. And so when you're missing your best player, it's hard for me to have that group ranked near the top. Now, the good news is somebody had to finish last. And if this is your quote unquote lowest ranked position group going into the spring, let's say I'm correct, and this is number 5, this is a good sign for Notre Dame because you can make a case for offensive line, you can make a case for receivers, you can make a case for several positions. But when you look at the spring tight end depth chart, which means no Mitchell Evans, I have tight end number 5. But I still think that this gives it a great opportunity for these players because Mitchell isn't going to be out there. It's a ton of reps for Eli Raridan, a ton of reps for Cooper Flanagan, Davis Sherwood, and of course, Jack Larson, who's the newcomer. Plus, there's some walk-ons at tight end that I'm intrigued by. Justin Fisher's a guy that I'm very intrigued by. Is maybe developing to an H-back role. Does Henry Garrity take a step up this season as a tight end guy? So if you actually look at the depth at tight end, there's a lot of guys at that position. I'm focusing mostly on the scholarship guys at this point in time. So that's why they're my number 5 group. There's some talent there. I like this. I like this room, even as is. If Notre Dame goes into the fall, let's just say for whatever reason Mitchell Evans is not around. Let's just say hypothetically, just for fun, he decides, you know what, I'm going to go to the NFL. I'm going to be in the supplemental draft. I'm ready to go to the NFL. Didn't realize it, but I am now. Just having some fun with that one because it's not going to happen. And he's not there in the fall. This is still a pretty good tight end room. Eli Raridan has loads of talent potential. Cooper Flanagan's a really good football player and would fit the way that Mike Denbrock has used the tight end in the past. When he hasn't had a real difference maker at tight end, he's shown that he can use the tight end as a play action run game weapon more so than a pass game weapon and still be dangerous with that position. Even though it's not the volume position we've seen in the past, Cooper could be that, but Cooper can also make plays in the pass game. If Eli and Cooper are both healthy, and Notre Dame goes into the season and that's their 1-2 punch at tight end, you're in a pretty good position. The depth behind it's not great. I also don't have Kevin Bauman in this group because I have no idea where he is right now from an injury standpoint. I have no idea what his health situation is, and I didn't want to include him and that without knowing that. So if Kevin Bauman's healthy, then the numbers look a little bit better at this point in time, and you feel a little bit better about where things stand at the tight end position. But right now, going into the season, they are my number 4 ranked group. I have a feeling with my next 2 positions, there's going to be a lot of disagreement. I'm curious who you guys have at 5, but here's my number 5, tight ends. My number 4 is offensive line. You can see who's out there. We know what the starting lineup is going to look like. The whole offensive line is interesting because this group right now is 4th because there's so many questions at the position. And there's so much youth at the position. The reason I struggled having them where I had them, however, is because there's also a lot of talent there. I mean, Charles Jagasaw could end up being the highest drafted player on the entire offense whenever his time comes, which is hopefully multiple years down the road. But he's still just a true sophomore with 1 career start under his belt. I mean, that's where he is. Pat Coogan's a solid, steady player, but that's it. Ashton Craig and Billy Schrouth, lots of talent, but they've got a lot to prove. And then the depth behind them is very unproven. So if you just go off raw talent, you could make a case with the offensive line being higher, but it's unproven. And that's the big question mark. I even think you could make a case to have them last because of all the questions. But I think that this group showed me enough with Ashton and Billy in the last 2 games of the regular season with Pat, and then what this group as a whole showed in the bowl game. Because the interesting thing is Notre Dame is going to go into next season without 3 guys that started the majority of the season. Just they're off the team anymore. And potentially a 4th, depending on when Rocco Spindler comes back. I don't know when Rocco is going to be healthy. So for the spring, 4 of your 5 starting offensive linemen for the majority of last season are gone. Normally, you'd have a lot of question marks about that position. But the interesting thing about this is they actually, all 5 starters for the spring started a game together in the bowl game, and they handled themselves well. So that gave me some confidence to, hey, look, we at least know somewhat of the baseline of what this group can be on a good day. We don't know if this group can be consistently like that, or will they have, if they would have played a game a week later, would they have taken a big step back and struggled? Can they play even better? Can they be more dominant and play at an even higher level? Don't know. Those are the question marks. And so that's where when I look at this football team and I think about, where the offensive line is, what the potential of this offensive line is, you start to get a little bit more encouraged by what they can be. At least they are for me. And so that's why I have the offensive line number 4. Number 3, and it's interesting. I can already see in some of these, some of you guys have wide receivers number 5, some of you have them number 4. And here's why I think a lot of you are missing a little bit on the receiving core, because you're focusing a lot, understandably, on what we've seen in the past, or what we haven't seen, might be a better way of putting it, from this group in the past. And here's why I think that in this particular instance, we are missing the boat a little bit. And I'm only looking at what this group has done, that's the group together, right? So I'm not even talking about Bo Collins. I'm not even including Logan Saldate in here. I'm just talking about the guys who are going to be here for the spring. The interesting thing about this group is that it's actually the most experienced group that Notre Dame has coming back next season. If you look at the kind of production that this group has had as a group, as a unit, and look at what they did this past season, but then also through their careers, even if you take Bo Collins out of the conversation, this is a group that had a lot of production last year. There's no unit on the offensive football team that had more production in 2023 than the wide receivers. That's just a fact. I mean, because you remember, Riley Leonard only played half the year before he got hurt. He got hurt in game 5, played 2 more games after that, wasn't healthy, didn't play the rest of the year. The running back group, a lot of talent. They played a bunch. They had over 1,000 yards of offense combined last year. It was like over 800 rushing, over 200 receiving at Notre Dame. So they obviously played a bunch. Offensive linemen have played a game together. Tight ends have played some good football. But when you look at the production that Notre Dame has returning at the wide receiver position, it far exceeds anything that they've done anywhere else. And again, I'm not even including Bo Collins in this conversation. Notre Dame's receiving core last season, for just what they produced in 2023, had 153 catches. They had 2,470 yards receiving, and they had 19 touchdowns. That's what the Notre Dame receiving core did in 2023. I'm not talking about what they did in high school. I'm not talking about what they did, 2-3 years ago. I'm talking about last season. Notre Dame had Chris Mitchell had 1,000 yards last year. Oh, he did it at Florida International. Okay, cool. He did it at Florida International. You are absolutely correct. For a team that barely threw the football, and he did play one game last year against an SEC school. He went on the road against Arkansas, had 6 catches for 157 yards on the road against an SEC team, right? Did play at the end of the year against a decent Western Kentucky team, had 8 catches for 116 yards, right? I mean, he had some big moments in big games last year. So he's a guy that's produced a lot already. And yes, he's a veteran guy. He's got a lot of experience. Jaden Harrison comes from Marshall, where he was a first-team All-American kick returner. Factors in no way to this conversation. But even as a receiver last year, he was second on the team at Marshall in catches, I believe. Let's see, he was, second. You had one guy had more catches, but he led the team in yards last season with 410. He comes back. Obviously, Jordan Faison had 19 catches for 322 yards and 4 touchdowns. Jaden Greathouse had 18 catches for 265 yards and 5 touchdowns. Jaden Thomas had 21 catches for 310 yards and 2 touchdowns. And Deion Colsey had 3 catches for 45 yards. If you look at the production that these guys have had for their careers, you're talking about a group that has over 4,000 yards of offense, right? So you can dismiss, he did this in Conference USA. And again, the Ohio State fans in the chat right now talking about, he did it in Conference USA. Guys, he had 6 catches for 157 yards on the road against an SEC team. You'd be foolish to ignore that. That's production. This is Division I football. He didn't transfer from the Division III level. He transferred from a Division I football team, and he put up numbers. And that's what you're looking for. You're talking about a guy that is produced. Now, and my counter would be, what's more valuable, producing at Florida International or not producing anywhere? Think about that, right? So the answer is obvious. And he's a guy that has produced at a high level. So, you talk about, okay, Ohio State fan, Marvin Harrison played against Western Kentucky, Conference USA team last year, right? Had 5 catches for 126 yards and a touchdown. Emeka Egbuka, 4 catches for 57 yards against that Western Kentucky team. Chris Mitchell played against that team too, had 8 catches for 116 yards, right? So we have something to hold off. We have something to stack it up to, right? So when you look at it, the production cannot be ignored. Now, you also can't say, and this is where the counter argument to that, you'd be foolish to dismiss the production that Chris Mitchell had at Florida National. You'd be foolish to dismiss what Jaden Harrison did at Marshall. You'd be just as foolish to assume that they're going to come to Notre Dame and do the exact same thing. That's the error on the opposite side. But when you put it all together and you talk about what Jordan Faison did as a freshman, when you talk about what Jaden Greathouse did as a freshman, when you talk about what Chris Mitchell did at Florida International for 4 years, when you talk about what Deion Colsey on the roster, you talk about what Jaden Harrison did, plus you've got KK Smith, you've got Cam Williams, you've got Micah Gilbert, all part of this roster. There's a lot of depth and a lot of talent. The question for me is not going to be, will the group be good next year? I fully expect it to be a good receiving core. Good doesn't win you a championship. Good wins you 9-10 games. The question is, can this be a group that can go out there against A&M and Louisville and Florida State and USC in the regular season and play at a high level? Will it be good enough when you get to the postseason and you play against Ohio State and you play against Georgia and you play against Bama or Texas or Michigan or whoever you play in the postseason? Will they be good then? That's the question. That's the unknown. We don't know if they're going to play at a high level there. To respond to a question, somebody said, why would I include Chris Mitchell and Bo Collins? Because this is a spring preview and Chris Mitchell will be on the team in the spring. Bo Collins won't. I said that at the very beginning. This is about guys that are going to be out there for the spring. Bo Collins will not be out there during the spring. Chris Mitchell will. Jaden Harrison will. Cam Williams will. Micah Gilbert will. And that's a lot of talent. Now the key is, can they put it together? That's the thing. And so you can already assume that they're not going to be. It's amazing, some of the negativity. It's March. And some of you are already assuming that this group can't play well. I'm glad I'm not you. That would be a sad place to be. But I like this group. I think this group has a chance to be really good. Now it's about proving it. And we're going to find out if they can be that group. And that's why I have them number 3. Number 2, quarterback. Now, this is an interesting one because if you look at what Riley Leonard did 2 years ago, it's very exciting to see. You look what Steve Angeli did last year coming off the bench. I think he did some really good things. Love the talent of Kenny Minchie and CJ Carr. But the injury to Riley Leonard really kept him from producing at a high level last year. And while the talent is very good at quarterback, I just think the talent is even better in another position. I thought long and hard about putting quarterback number 1, but Riley Leonard really is really only been a starter for a year and a half. Quarterback experience is a lot more important to me than receiver or than experience at running back or receiver. And so to me, that's a little bit of my my pause for putting too much onto Riley Leonard or expecting it too much. Like, you're not going to hear me say, "Oh, Riley Leonard's going to be a Heisman candidate next year." You could, I get, anything can happen, but you're not going to hear me say, "Oh, he should be a number one candidate next year." Okay, that's a bit ridiculous, right? I mean, could it happen? Sure, it could happen. Who thought a year ago that Jaden Daniels was going to go out and win a Heisman? Who had that on their bingo? Who made that bet last March? Who put that $100 or $1,000 down in Vegas for that last year? Somebody did, I'm sure, but most didn't. So who knows what will happen? But I to me, I wish Riley was a guy that had just was able to play this full year this past season. At the same time, the flip side is, but if he did play all year, maybe he's not still in college. We don't know the answer to that. And so to me, with Riley, he's got the talent, but he just hasn't played quite enough. That's going to be the question mark. Can he really take that big jump this year? Remains to be seen. And for a quarterback, there's a lot more to prove there than a running back or receiver, in my opinion. And then Steve Angeli did some very nice things in the bowl game. Need to see more from him. The young guys need that opportunity. So there's just not a ton of experience behind Riley Leonard, and he doesn't have a ton of experience as a quarterback. Like Jaden Daniels going into last year was a fifth-year starter, not a fifth-year senior. Like, he had redshirted for a year. He was a fifth-year starter. He was a guy that started 5 years in his college career. Now, of course, one of those years was cut short because of COVID, and that's why he had the extra year. But he started in 2022, he started 14 games. In 2021, he started 13 games. In 2020, he started all 4 games for Arizona State. Obviously, the Pac-12 didn't play a full year, and then he started 12 or played 12 games as a freshman. And actually, that was his best season from a passing standpoint prior to this past season was his freshman year at Arizona State. So Jaden had played a ton of football coming into this year. Riley hasn't played as much. And so that's why I have that group down at the bottom. You could make a case for them being number one just because of how good Riley is and just the God-given ability, but I don't. I don't have them there just yet. My number one is the running back room. And I know that part of this conversation is experience, but there is actually returning production at running back. As I mentioned earlier, this group last season had over 1,000 yards of offense. You had over 800 rushing yards from the running backs last year. You had over 200 receiving, or actually it was just around 800 last year. And you had around 300 receiving yards last year at running back, and you had 10 touchdowns. That's just on offense. That doesn't include what these guys did in the return game last year, because obviously Jadarian Price had 344 yards on kick returns and a touchdown. Devin Ford, actually, the whole running back room, they were the only ones returning kicks last year. They averaged 26.3 yards per return. They had 552 yards on returns and a touchdown. So the running back room, if you just look at all the yards, total yards, had over 1,500, actually over 1,600 yards of offense, or 1,600 yards last year. If you take the return game out, which I do because it's more applicable to what they're doing here, you're talking about a group that has over 1,100 yards. When you combine that with the talent and the depth of talent, I don't know that there's a room on the Notre Dame offense that I have more confidence in being really good this year than running back. And at the end of the day, it comes down to this. Of all the positions I've talked about, the group that has the most, that the group to me where experience is least important and talent is most important is running back. It's just the nature of that position. You don't have to have 20 plus starts under your belt like you do at quarterback, or you'd prefer at quarterback or left tackle or guard or whatever the case may be. It's just a position where God-given ability just takes over to a degree. And that's where I see it running back. I see 6 guys that could start for Notre Dame next year and be good football players. I see 5 guys that if they were the starter from game 1 and played the whole year, could be 1,000-yard rushers. There are not many teams in college football that have 5 guys that could do that. And then a 6th guy in Devin Ford, who maybe, I don't think it's a 1,000-yard rusher. He's the one guy that is better suited for sort of that complementary role. But the other 5, to me, are guys that if they had to be that guy, could put up a grand next year. It would be different for each guy. It would be more dynamic for each guy, but they all have that kind of ability. And there aren't a lot of running back rooms, in my opinion, that have 5 guys like that. And that's why running back for me is the number one position group going into the spring. Now, here